when I'm sometimes when I wake up, I can even feel like I am 70 to 80 years old,
Wow.
and and take me a little bit of time to walk, and sometimes I wake up and I feel like I'm 15 again, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's the spastic cerebral palsy can do that to you, and people might say to me, well, it's that's why you needed to do physio. Yes, you can do
Yes.
physio, but because of the spastic situation, you never know what you're gonna feel the next day, right?
So, welcome everyone to another episode of the Unfiltered Real Talk podcast. Today, we're talking about cerebral palsy, and I'm talking about it with a person who is living with cerebral palsy to help us understand this disability and how to support persons with cerebral palsy and anybody else who may have disability or supporting others with special needs. So, with me today is Carlos. Welcome, Carlos, to the podcast. How are you?
Thank you so much. I'm really great. Thank you so much for having me as well in this podcast, and inviting me to come into your podcast for sure.
Absolutely. So, Carlos, please tell us a little bit more about yourself and why you wanted to come on board to talk about cerebral palsy today.
Well, as you said, my name is Carlos, and I was born in Mexico, Monterrey, Mexico. So I've been actually in Canada for about 17 years now. I
Oh,
came
wow.
into to Canada when I was 19 years old, and I wanted to kind of have a better kind of independence life. I realized that back at home, I did have some independence, but I realized because actually my parents were really good at giving me that independence, giving me that, uh, losing the reins a little bit to
Hmm.
kind of have that independence. So I decided to come to Canada to go to study to university and to have a better life, right? So, and
Absolutely.
once I went to university, I kind of wanted to. I realized that my story, as many other people's stories, was absolutely amazing, and I wanted to be an inspiration for other people to share their stories. So I realized that so many people don't know what cerebral palsy is. So many people out there haven't really realized what cerebral palsy is. So I wanted really to apply that into my story for people to be able to understand a little better of what cerebral palsy is. That cerebral palsy is not as bad as people may think.
Yes.
You can still live with cerebral palsy. You can still have a wonderful life with cerebral palsy. Thankfully, it's not a life-threatening disability, uh, and it's not like a disease. And that's something that I wanted to clarify to people, as well as throwing a little bit of a motivational aspect to it about my life and how how much of an impact my life could have on people, but how much of an impact my story could have to other
On
people
people.
to, to,
Absolutely.
to spread their stories as well to other individuals as well, right? So
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit more about, your story and your journey. You said you're from Mexico and you moved to Canada a little while, well, some years ago.
some years
Uh,
ago, yeah.
some years ago. So tell us what that was like. I'm from Nigeria. I was born in Canada, but I spent the early years of my life in Nigeria. So I have some picture around how persons with special needs live in Nigeria, and I'm not sure how that is for you in Mexico. So can you share a little bit about how how that was? Like, do you guys have systems and infrastructure that support persons with cerebral palsy?
Our city in Monterrey is actually one of the best infrastructure cities in Latin America, but
Okay.
still, because it's still part of Mexico and it's a city in Mexico, it still doesn't have the infrastructure that Canada or even North America, other countries like even the U.S. has in in the actual countries, right? So when I was living in Monterey, it was in the early '80s. For me, it was like uh, there was not enough infrastructure, and you really had to fight for to have a better life because
Yeah.
there was no places to take a ramp. People actually, I was talking to my mom the other day, reminding me about some stories about my life, and she's like, "You remember when people used to park in the accessible parking stall in Mexico? How
Hmm.
they don't have a disability and they park in
But
the
they park
accessible
there
parking.
anyway.
They park there anyways, so you have to still walk a couple of like longer miles away for the store. So there was a point that in order for us to fight and do the awareness part of it for people, we used to get out of the car. Like my mom used to drop me off, get out of the car, and she said, "Go stand up in the front of the mall door and just show people that you actually have crutches." For the other person who's coming out of the accessible stall doesn't have that, and he just walking normally, right? So we wanted to teach that lesson and be like, "Hey, look at me, how I am, and how I'm able to use this stall, but I'm not able to use it because you're already parked there, right?" So
That is
we
so important.
it is very important to teach that to people. So Mexico didn't have that, or at least Monterrey, even though we had a really good, like somewhat of a good infrastructure and compared to other cities, they didn't have the actual education and the awareness to know that, hey, you know what, I'm able to walk. I don't want to park there because there might be somebody like Carlos who needs to
Who actually needs
actually
it.
needs it there
Yeah.
and actually get out of the vehicle easier to go into the door easier, right? So we started to notice that, and we started to realize that it was important. Also, the physiotherapy part of it, for people who have cerebral palsy, which is a disability that affects muscle and body movement, it affects really. You need to have a lot of physio. The important part for me is that physiotherapy is huge in individuals with cerebral palsy, right? So we realized that the physiotherapy in the 80s in the public sector was not as great as the private
In the
sector.
private
But
sector, yeah.
as you I don't know how is in Nigeria on those era and now, but the public sector could be free in Mexico or lower cost, and compared to the private sector it would
Yes.
be a higher cost, right? So your parents or like my parents, for example, they had to really invest a lot in themselves, not only financially but even physically and psychologically, to be able to spend some time with me going on physio for 15 years from
Wow.
age 2 to age, like from age 1 actually to age 15, to go to physio. And in order for me to go to physio, we started to go different areas. We started to go to different places first, and then we came back into a private physiotherapist, which
Hmm.
it ended up shaping me to the person that I am today. And I actually thank her very much for what she has done
Of course,
for all those years, right?
yes, of course. Like, I think without having that support from your parents and your family, it would be so difficult. And that's why we're having this conversation today, talking about supporting persons with special needs and specifically cerebral palsy is what we're talking about today. And I feel like many times we don't stop to think. You started out talking about the parking lot situation, and that's huge. Like, even over here, every now and then, there are dumb people out there who go park in, handicap parking, as it's called, and you don't have the sticker, but you park there anyway. But
Mhm.
here, the good thing is that the system works. Whereas your mom had to make you go stand in the store and say, "Look, I actually physically need this spot."
Mhm.
Right over here, if you are parking without a sticker, you get a ticket, and it's a
You
huge
get a ticket.
ticket.
Mhm.
A nice fat ticket that will make sure that the next time you want to park there, you think again. So I think that this is so important that you started with that situation, and I hope that our listeners who are listening today, if you're one of those kinds of people, you need to think about Carlos and so many other Carlos out there who
Mhm.
really need our support. And it's not sometimes about financial support, it's about things like this, just everyday things that sometimes we take for granted. When we educate ourselves, we stop and think, we should be able to positively change our behavior. And that's what
Mhm.
we're talking about today by, raising awareness. So, Carlos, start to tell me a little bit more about the type of cerebral palsy that you have. So, in doing my research, getting ready for this conversation, I
Mhm.
found that there's four main types of cerebral palsy. However, maybe you can tell us what you have, and maybe just general background and understanding about cerebral palsy that we should know.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that question as well. When I was actually reading about it, I know a lot about cerebral palsy because I've been doing a lot of research into it after I do my presentations and kind of do the awareness to people. My cerebral palsy is actually the most common one, which is the spastic cerebral palsy. As you said, there's
Okay.
four types. There's spastic, there's ataxic, and there's kinetic, and there's also this kinetic one, and there's also mixed one. So you can have mixed between ataxic, spastic, and
Spastic.
this kinetic, right?
Yes.
But the most common one, if you look at, if anybody who's listening to this podcast, if they look at the internet, you realize that 80% to 90% of the individuals who are born with cerebral palsy, they're born with spastic cerebral palsy, which is what I have.
Ah,
So now the
okay.
difference with the spastic cerebral palsy and this kinetic cerebral palsy, and as well as the ataxic, is that the spastic cerebral palsy is like you're always tense. So, for example, when I get nervous, I'm not nervous right now, but when I get nervous, I get really tight in my
Like
vocal
tense.
cords,
Okay.
like really tense, right? Even a individual without cerebral palsy, like yourself or somebody else who doesn't have cerebral palsy or any disabilities, you get tense outside when there's like -30 weather,
Oh
right?
yeah.
So
Oh
when I
yeah.
go outside and it's -30 weather, it's double to triple the tense amount because I'm already tense enough all the time that my muscles are tense all the time because of the spastic that I have. So sometimes when I describe the cerebral palsy that I have, like I said a little bit ago, cerebral palsy is a disability that affects muscle and body movements, right? So when I'm sometimes when I wake up, I can even feel like I am 70 to 80 years old,
Wow.
and take me a little bit of time to walk, and sometimes I wake up and I feel like I'm 15 again, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's the spastic cerebral palsy can do that to you, and people might say to me, well, it's that's why you needed to do physio. Yes, you can do
Yes.
physio, but because of the spastic situation, you never know what you're gonna feel the next day, right? So that's what I have. I spastic cerebral palsy. So a ataxic one and dyskinetic. The dyskinetic one is involuntary movements. So people can have involuntary movements. People can
Okay.
have uh, loose muscles. Like for example, mine will be tense, but some other people can have a little bit of a weakened muscles. Right.
Okay.
A lot of people compare dyskinetic cerebral palsy uh, with muscular dystrophy, which is a disease, is not a disability. The muscular dystrophy
Okay.
actually deteriorates. You end up getting worse and worse over time. Cerebral palsy, you never. It's the same all the time. You never get worse because it is just a disability. It is not a disease.
It's not a
So, but
disease. Okay.
a lot of people, when they look at me, they go, "Do you have muscular dystrophy?" And I'm like, "No, I don't. I have cerebral palsy, and
Mm-hmm.
it's
There's
like
a difference.
there's a
Yes.
complete different."
Thank
And
you.
I realized that. So we decided to do, because the dyskinetic cerebral palsy could be the same, and same with the ataxic one. The ataxic uh, could be like, again, a combination of losing muscles and a combination of of tightened and distightened muscles, like not tight enough. That's what all those ones, and then you have the mixed one, which is a combination of all three, one together. You know, a spastic, uh, dyskinetic, and ataxic. But you can also, like, what I want people to understand is that cerebral palsy is so big and so spectrum
Yeah.
that
It's
people
a
sometimes they
spectrum
cannot
disorder. Yeah.
exactly they cannot see it. You know, they cannot see it sometimes. Like we saw a client who had cerebral palsy only in his pinky finger, so if he had it hidden in his pocket, you wouldn't even know that he had
Oh.
it. You know what I mean? So
Mm-hmm.
it's so broad. The diagnosis is so broad that sometimes people get so confused about it. So that's why we're doing all this uh, teaching
Absolutely.
of what cerebral palsy
Yes,
is,
it
right?
is. Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to just piggyback off that and just let our listeners know that we're not here to diagnose anyone. We're just
No.
talking strictly from a place of education and
Hmm.
teaching, just like Carlos have said, because this is something that impacts us. This is something that we're passionate about. So we're just sharing information. If you feel like you have cerebral palsy or something else, just make sure you go see your medical practitioner. Just go see your personal doctor, right? So that's
Exactly,
just want to
medical
say that and put
practitioner.
it out there. So, Carlos, I know that you work. So, you are a supervisor and a community education coordinator here in our city in Edmonton. So, tell us a little bit about what you do and why you chose that profession, why you went into that.
When I first started with cerebral palsy, which it was almost 11 years ago, in September it will be 11 years ago, I didn't realize that I was going to go into um, this particular organization, Cerebral Palsy Alberta, which is what I work. But I always wanted to serve. I always wanted to give myself to people. For me, serving is uh, it's an absolutely amazing gift. Whether you're doing
Yes.
it with your voice, whether you're doing what you're doing physically, you're changing people's life, or whether
Yes.
you're doing it by just being there for somebody, you're helping somebody, you're serving somebody. So for me, it has always been, even when I was a kid, up to when I was 14, I think between 11 to 14, I started to teach catechism at home to
Oh,
little
nice.
kids, in little towns in Mexico.
And catechisma is catechism, that's Catholic.
Yeah, it's like a Bible study,
Bible
basically,
study in Catholic
like
churches. Okay.
like
I recognize
Catholic
that. Yeah.
Catholic churches, right? So I
Okay.
started to teach that to kids. So that part of serving came up to me through the years, and I started to realize, okay, this is where I want to go. Uh, Particularly when I grew older, when I become an adult. So what happened was, when I was in university, I started with a major in English, actually, and a minor in communications, and I realized that that wasn't the way I wanted to go, because I wanted to continue serving, but English wasn't going to give me the aspect of serving. So I took a humanitarian degree, which it was a social science degree, to kind of understand society, understand the social aspect of people, and I kept my communication back minor into
Okay.
university. So I decided to continue to go into that serving aspect. So what happened when I went to university, I had the opportunity to go to Honduras uh, to to be a translator for a water project for a community that needed some water in Honduras. Uh, we went there for a whole month. So I remember all that part of serving continue going on into my life. So when I graduated, I I came back into I finished up graduating university, and
Mhm.
then I went into uh, Cerebral Palsy Alberta. When I first came along to work with Cerebral Palsy Alberta, I was really afraid of working for Cerebral Palsy Alberta, but that was on me. That wasn't on them. That was on me, because I thought, okay, I know a lot about cerebral palsy already. I know how it works. I live with it.
Live with
Uh,
it. Yes.
I live with it, so I don't really need to know more about it, and it's going to put me down. That's what I thought at first.
Ah, so that was the
But
fear.
yeah,
Okay.
that was my fear of, like,
Okay.
going there, kind of what's going to happen if I see other people with a disability, what's going to happen if I'm not able to kind of express myself, or if I'm going to be put down in a sense on my own. And
Hmm.
so I realized that I, I remember after I consulted with my parents, and actually I consulted with myself, and when you go to bed, you sometimes kind of
Of course.
think
You have
about
a
think
conversation with yourself.
exactly,
Self, you need to be ready for this job.
exactly, you need to be
Yes.
like, should you be ready? You need to be ready. You need to give an
Hmm.
opportunity to it. So I decided to do that. I decided to give it an opportunity, and it has been the best decision I ever made, because
Wow.
I realized that I needed to learn more about my disability, And that's when I realized that we needed to make sure that our stories was huge. Not only persons with other disabilities, but persons with disabilities, their stories are phenomenally huge. So I started in the call center with Cerebral Palsy. I started as a telephone rep, and then I went on into becoming a supervisor, kind of supervising a full body of people, uh,
Wow.
which interestingly enough, our call center was actually uh, 90% of the individuals who were in the call center had some sort of a disability at the time that I was
That's
a
amazing.
supervisor, right?
Wow.
So you started to realize that not only Cerebral Palsy Alberta advocates for a life without limits, or even a better enriching the life for individuals with disabilities, but it also gives them the opportunity to um, have an employment, right? To have an employment here in Canada, which is it's a big thing for me. And then from then on, Cerebral Palsy realized that I wanted to be a spokesperson for persons with disabilities, basically kind of sharing my story. Um, a couple of years back, before I actually moved into community education coordinator, our programs coordinator at the time, who later became a programs manager, was doing presentations in schools and presentations in businesses and presentations everywhere, basically. So I decided to be as spokesperson as I am. I decided to speak up and say, "Hey, I want to share my story, but I also want to teach people that they can share their stories as well." So I want to kind of join into the disability awareness presentation aspect. So my friend who started the disability presentations a year before says, "Hey, do you want to come in and kind of see how I do the presentations, kind of grow into it, kind of see what you learn from it, share your story, because I believe your story is amazing." I started to talk to her about my story. Her name is Kimberly. She's amazing, and she started to learn from my story, and then we started to kind of grow as a team. And then after that, she moved on into a different direction from our organization to do other stuff. She had to do other job that she did on a different job, and then she came back to our organization again.
Oh,
And
wow.
before she came back, she said, "I believe you can do the presentations." And so I started to take on the full presentations aspect, to kind of to teach people about the disability awareness, but also include my life experience and my job experience. So I started to grow that way. And after that, that's where Leah came along, which you met Leah over
Yes. And
social
shout
media.
out to Leah for
And
connecting us.
yeah,
Thank
Leah's
you.
Leah's amazing. She
Yes,
came
yes.
along about 2 years after I started. But I started in 2010. She came along in 2013, I believe, and that's when
Okay.
uh, we started to connect. Me and Leah have a absolutely huge connection with each other as co-worker and as friends, and we started to shape up a little more, mostly in the past couple of years, to shape up a little more what we want to do with our with the presentation and now the podcast as well, right? Too as well.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yes.
that's what
Thank
we
you.
what in a summary, that's what I do for the organization, and I do in Canada for about almost 11 years now. So
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. So, I want us to talk a little bit more about employment and how we can support persons who have cerebral palsy who want to work, but maybe for whatever reason they're afraid to work. I know you talked about fear accepting a position
mhm.
within Cerebral Palsy Alberta, but maybe they just are just afraid to even venture into working, period, or volunteering or something else. Maybe there's something they're passionate about. I don't know, painting, whatever,
Mhm.
but they just haven't gotten that courage to do it yet. And I know there's a lot of stigma and stereotype attached when one has a disability. So I want us to talk about that a little bit. What can we say to these individuals living with disabilities who want to do more, but haven't quite summoned up the courage to do it yet?
I think that they need to basically, it's sometimes it's hard when you have a disability to put yourself out there, to kind of look into employment, to kind of say, am I going to be good enough,
Yeah,
for what I'm required to do. It's challenging. Also,
it
it is
is.
very, very challenging for a
Yes.
person with disabilities. However, I believe that most persons with disabilities, and I can tell you this for experience, most persons with disabilities want to work. They're eager to work. In fact, and statistically speaking, if you hire a person with disabilities, if an employer hire a person with disabilities,
Hmm.
I I know for a fact that they will miss less time at work than an individual who doesn't have a disability.
I
Why?
totally agree with you on that one.
Because they're
Yes.
so eager to work, and they're so eager to show the employer how good they are at their job, or that they can do their job,
Yeah.
so that then they actually work hard
They
to do the
probably
job.
work harder too. I feel like there is also that desire to prove themselves. I'm at the same level as the other person without a disability. So there's that eagerness that they want to go over and beyond. And they do go over and beyond just to show that I am ready to be here. You know, I am valuable and I can be here and I can do it. So they want to prove that. And that's what we need to leverage as society.
Absolutely, and I think that a lot of persons with disabilities might feel like employers might not give them the opportunity
Yes, there's
to
that.
to work, right? And for me, it's important to say to people in your channel and in different ways of what we're doing is, if you have a disability, whatever disability you have, but you're able to work somehow, like whether it's with your wheelchair, whether it's uh, using crutches like myself, or using a walker, give yourself a chance to prove yourself that you can do it, because
Okay.
I guarantee you that they will be able to do it. And if you show the employer, for me is, if you show the employer that you can do the same task that a person without a disability could do, but they might take them a little bit of time, to do it, but you can do it. Employer will give you the opportunity, or they should give you the
Should
opportunity.
give you the
if
opportunity.
if the employer doesn't give you the opportunity, then that will be some sort of discrimination, right? which
Yes,
is
it is.
which is something that could happen too. It could happen
Absolutely.
to the point of, if people think that in Canada it doesn't happen, but it could happen,
It
really,
does happen.
honestly.
If we're paying attention to the news, it does happen all the
I,
time.
absolutely, it can easily happen, but you need to make sure that. And I think that most of the employers nowadays, because of the news that you're talking about and social media
And
nowadays,
social
they're,
media,
they're, they're,
yes.
they're starting to realize that okay, we started to realize a person with a disability can do what a person without a disability can do as well. So we need to give them that opportunity as well. We need to give them that advantage. Now, the other thing that I can attach to your question is that if you look at all the job postings out there nowadays, when you're looking for a job, a lot of the job posting goes, "Oh, the environment is fast paced. You need to be doing fast paced stuff." So
Ah,
a lot of person with disabilities might be a little bit, not intimidated, but might be a little hesitant to say, am I going to be able to even give her a try, or should I give her a try to this particular job if they're asking me to do fast pace? I, for example, know that I can do a fast paced job, but it might take me a little longer than you would do it, EJ,
mm-hmm.
regarding the same position, right? But I can do it as well, or as much well done as you do it, taking my time to do it, right? So that's the part that I like to talk to the disability community, saying, despite of that little aspect on the description that says fast paced, give it a try, because you might not know. You might be able to impress the employer, and the employer will say, "Oh, you know what? This guy's is actually really, really good,
Mm-hmm.
and and
And
and
he
I
could
want
do
to
it.
keep him hired." That's why there's a 3 month probation in most of the jobs. So I
Yes.
think that if you're applying for jobs, you know, you need to, if you're looking as an employer point of view, you need to be like, okay, this guy has good credentials. I'm gonna give him a try for 3 months, or maybe 3.5 months, if I am, and see how he does. And then if he does really well, then okay, I'm gonna hire him fully, right? So I think as a person with a disability, you just need to try it. You just need to kind of make a feel for yourself, look deeply into yourself,
Put
and
yourself
say,
out there. Yeah.
exactly, and put yourself out there and say, I can do it. I'm trusting myself that I can do it, and I need to show that to the employer, right? So
Yeah, thank you. And you've started answering the next question I had, which is what employers can do as well. And I think you've started to say that. So, first of all, we need to put ourselves out there. And the next thing is employers need to make that opportunities available and
mhm,
think about ways that maybe systemic discrimination might be there in the language of
exactly.
job postings, in the way jobs are presented, right, in the opportunities that are given. I think
Mhm.
those are so huge because I never thought about this fast pace that you just talked about right now, because that's so true. I think every single job I've applied to uses the word fast paced, but you're not literally running in the job or
No,
anything.
no,
Like, it's not a sprint, marathon
exactly.
or whatever. So like, it's just you sitting down on your decks and being able to produce the work at the due dates or before the due dates or whatever deliverable
Mhm.
time. So we just need to be careful that we're not eliminating people the way we are running our organizational businesses, because that's a huge one that I just took away. Anything else that you could say to employers? And this could also be employers in our home countries, because I'm thinking about our home countries as
Okay.
well, because I know here in Canada there's tons of opportunity for persons with special needs. Of course, they still face challenges with getting
Mhm.
employed, but I feel
Mhm.
for those of us coming from a different country, I want our conversation to focus on those people as well. So for
Absolutely.
yourself, your people from Mexico, my people from Africa, what can we say to those employers and how they can better support persons with disabilities?
I personally think, and this is not something that I want to people employers in Africa or people in Mexico to feel like that I'm pointing fingers at them, but I personally think that employers need to educate themselves a little more on
Yeah.
how a person with a disability can succeed and can make a living uh, for himself, but it can actually improve the company itself, because a
Hmm.
lot of persons, a lot of places in Africa, and a lot of cities in Mexico, they have the excuse of, oh, we don't have the resources, or we don't have the finances to be able to give the opportunity to an individual with disabilities. But sometimes the individual with disabilities in the world, like in Mexico or somewhere in Africa, they are just looking for an opportunity.
Yeah.
They're just looking for an opportunity to grow, because even volunteer jobs at your own countries
Yes.
can help out develop a person with a disability to grow as well, right?
100%.
And
Yes.
you need to be, because if you let me share this story to you, in Mexico, a lot of persons with disabilities are placed on, like, my mom used to say, I don't understand why this person is working. Don't get me wrong, Starbucks is amazing. But she said, I don't understand why this person with a disability is working at Starbucks when he can be working for General Electric, for example,
Oh,
Latin America, right? Or something like that, right? So what happens is, you need to give, as a country, you as an employer, you need to give the opportunity to a person, even to let them volunteer for a while, to kind of to see their experience, and let them volunteer for a while and say, hey, this is what we can do as, or what I can do as a person for your company. And maybe if he volunteers, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 months, and after you see that he's done an amazing job and has proven to the company that can help the company grow,
mhm.
then give him the opportunity to be hired, right? Like, we're not looking into, I just want employers to know that we deserve the same opportunity as everybody else,
Yes.
right? And
100%.
even in countries like Nigeria, in cities like in Mexico, like Monterrey and other cities, we deserve that opportunity, because we will give our 100%, our 100% as an individual with a disability to work. So I just wanted to for them to do that, and the whole aspect of, we don't have the infrastructure, so I don't want to
Oh,
hire a person
yes.
with a disability.
Let's talk
Or
about that because I had another recording that I did with somebody else around cerebral palsy and her organization that is supporting persons with special needs. And that is the first thing she said, is that employers are quick to say they don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the facility, they don't have the funding, so they
Mhm.
can't do this and they can't implement that. So let's talk about that. Please get into it.
To me, they I can understand when they say I don't have the facilities and I don't have the finances, but if I go back to them and say, you're telling me that you don't have the finances, that you don't have the facilities, I can guarantee you that if you dig deeply, if you scrap deeply, you will find funding to be able to improve your facility and to be able to put a ramp, or to be able to put an elevator, or to
Mhm.
be able to put something that could improve a person with disabilities. What if the person with disabilities that you're hiring could increase your finances resources to
Mhm.
triple the amount, so you can make what you spend on the infrastructure in less than a year or a year and a half,
Absolutely.
right? So it's
Mhm.
not it's for me, that's the biggest excuse that an employer can use in those type of countries, because they're like, I don't want to go with the hassle, because for a lot of
Yeah.
the employers it's a
Castle.
hassle
Yeah.
to put a ramp on, to put an elevator on, to put a better access on a parking lot, or situations like that, that they can improve, that they can easily do it, but they don't want to do it because it's harder for them to
Yeah.
do. It's harder for them to do.
Yeah.
But you know what? It's not hard. They just have to really realize that we are here for a reason, and we can give you the same quality of finances that you need. And who knows? Maybe we can give it to you in a triple, like in a
Yeah. More.
quicker time, in a triple time, or even more in quantity wise. So
Yeah.
give the opportunity, and don't put those excuses, because for me those are excuses. Yeah, you can say, if you are an employer who says, okay, well, I don't have an opportunity for you right now, but we are looking into improving our facilities so that we can put uh, automatic doors, we can put an elevator, we can put
Mhm.
a ramp, and we can put open spaces into the parking lots bigger for you to go in about, I don't know, 6 months to a year. I will make sure to call you once it's done. Then the person will feel like, okay, then I can maybe go volunteer for 6 months or something, and or continue to look for another job. But at least this company is already telling me
It's doing
that
something.
it's doing
Yeah.
something for, not only for me, but for the future of the of other persons with disabilities who might want to work there, right? So I think it's huge to make employers, or even owners, understand that it's important to create a facility who is accessible and inclusion to persons with
Mhm.
disabilities, right?
Yeah.
For me,
Absolutely.
it's huge. And I think every country, if you look deeply, they will have money for creating a space like that, for
Yeah.
sure.
100%. I couldn't agree more. I think that's huge and well said. What I want to ask next then is, um, you've talked about the what individuals can do with regard to living a fulfilled life and how they can go about that, what employers can do as well to support persons with special needs. So what I want to do is just go back a little bit to when you were in school. So can you
Mhm.
share just a little bit about some of the challenges that you faced when you were going to school, and then how you overcame some of those challenges to support people who are students right now and living with disabilities?
Um, I went to school, like I went to school here, and then I went to school in Mexico, right? In Mexico, as I mentioned, the infrastructure in the school wasn't the same as it is here. So we didn't
Mm-hmm.
have
Of
ramps.
course.
We didn't have.
Yeah.
So
Same in Nigeria. I'm not aware. It can be. It's not comparable at all.
it's similar to probably to Nigeria where they have
Yes.
the infrastructure. So the biggest challenge that I had in school was at first was to go into the teachers and say, hey, instead of moving from because we used to have to go for different classes to different classrooms,
Okay.
upstairs, downstairs, up
Oh
into the third
yeah,
floor, up into the second
that's
floor, up
true.
into the so
Yes.
I was like as a parent, as my parents, they will go to the principal office and say, "Hey, you know what? My son cannot be climbing stairs all over the place. Either you do two things:
Yeah.
you either climb stairs or you put an elevator. So, or what other resolution you will have?" And they will go, "Okay, what if they don't have to move from classrooms and they just stay, or if they move from classrooms,
In
they
the
would just
same
stay,
level.
they would just stay in the same level, right?"
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, well, that's something that will work out for me, right? That will work out for me. So I in
Yes.
Mexico, I went from classroom to classroom, but they were always in the same level, right? And actually, for that, teachers actually realized they were more conscious about that, about my disability and how important it was to have a ramp, how important it was to have, you know, access for persons with disabilities and being
Mm-hmm.
more considerate. So for me, those are the challenges that now I tell people what to do. You know, when I go to schools, I'm like, make sure that you make accessibility for individuals with disabilities because it's hard. I thankfully had, at the time when I was school, I had a walker, right? So I had to walk with a walker. But I cannot imagine my life if I would have had a wheelchair, for example, who, moving around. And then if you're not, if you, even if you have to get up one step, one single step,
One
you know,
single step,
it,
Carlos. Ain't
those
gonna be easy.
it's not going to be easy for
Mm-mm.
a person in a wheelchair. They won't
No,
they won't be able to do it. So
not at all.
I used to tell them, try to put the classrooms in one floor, but they will be plain, completely plain.
Yeah.
Don't have steps because then a person with a wheelchair wouldn't be able to do it. I thankfully was able to do it because I had a walker and then I had crutches, so I was able to get up that step. But what if I didn't? Right? So
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
that was the biggest challenge that I went through school. And then the other thing, the other difference that I saw here in Canada and compared to Mexico is in Mexico they in my earlier elementary years they didn't have like you need more time for tests. We're gonna put you on more time for tests, or in a different
Okay.
classroom. And in Mexico, you were like the same class, like the same time as everybody else, the same time as every student. Uh, you didn't have any special treatment per se, right? Or special
So it wasn't
opportunity.
modified for persons with special needs. So if the
Absolutely not.
exam was 1 hour, you got 1 hour.
I only had 1 hour. The
Wow.
exam was 1 hour. I only had 1 hour. The exam was an hour and a half. I only have an hour and a half. And in a way, that was
Wow.
something that I appreciated because that means that to me, and this is something I want to make clear in your channel here in your podcast here. To me, it's important to treat as an individual in school in employment as normal as as everybody else.
Okay.
So my school said it to me, and I actually agree on it. She said, I'm not going to give you more time because I want to treat you as normal as everybody else. You want to be treated as normal as everybody else? I'm going to give you that opportunity to do that, right? Now, I understand when I came to Canada that there were some students who really needed more time to write an exam. And
Yes.
thankfully, and even in Canada, I had challenges, and I'm going to tell you why. When I went to university, I don't know if you had this if you came across this situation, but when I went to university, um, students who had a disability who are not able to write by hand, they have an scribe person, a person
Yes.
who can go to class, who can scribe for you.
Yes.
And I think those person got, or at least in my university, they got some compensation financially or something like that, or maybe
Yeah.
in the
Yeah, I
tuition.
was a
Or
student strategist, so I'm very familiar with the resources you're talking about. Yeah.
so see, they had that, but for me, being an international student, I couldn't.
Oh,
I
you were an
couldn't.
international
I
student.
was an international student when I
Oh,
first came to Canada. I was not born in Canada. I was born in Mexico, right? So
okay.
when I came to Canada, I came with a student permit, right? So
Oh, yeah,
you are
that
not
would.
you are
Is
not
that
a,
for international student? That
pardon me?
is that available for international students? That resource?
The
Yeah, the
scribers,
scribers.
when I first went into university here, they were not. They were not available for
Yeah.
persons with disability. They were if you pay from your own pocket.
Oh boy.
But how am I going to pay from my own
No.
pocket
Yeah. No.
if you know what I mean? So
International fees were already very heavily skyrocketed prices, so there's just no way you're going to be adding any
uh,
extra expense.
so what I did, I'm always being very tenacious and very, I don't give up on situations. So what I did is I I grabbed somebody from the class. I became friends with that person and I said, "Could you please photocopy your notes for me?" So I have them and I read my book and I read your notes and I kind of, remember what the teacher says and so on and
Mm-hmm.
so forth. So all that situation was an overcome that I did to to be to be able to overcome that part. So another overcome that I did when it comes to um, school situation, right? So that those type of situations in Mexico, the whole infrastructure idea teach me to be more independent. And when I came to Canada, it's like, okay, you think by being in Canada it's easy, but it's not because the scribers are not available for you. So what are you going to do? So what I mentioned is I photocopy my stuff, and I thankfully did it all through my years. I think it took me about 4.5 years to 5 years to do my degree, 4 years, and I got pretty good grades on it. So I was very very excited about it. And what I did is actually I communicated with different persons with from different ethnic backgrounds, like from people. My school at King's University, where I went to, it was interesting because there was a huge group of people from Africa coming into university, a
Oh, at
huge one,
King's.
at King's, and
Okay.
and a lot of those people, some of those people were not able to write either because they just couldn't write it. So I used to tell them photocopy the notes for somebody else, and then use it on your test, right? If you're an international student, do it. Like, do that because you won't be able to have a scribe. So those are the challenges, and that prepared me when I came into employment. You know, into saying, okay, if you're an employer and a person needs to, like, you have a call center, and they cannot type, but they can speak,
Mhm.
right? They can speak. They while they're speaking, you can have a transcribe software who can transcribe.
Yeah, there are transcribe softwares now. I had a
Exact.
coworker way back when who had that, so she couldn't take notes, and my work involves a lot of writing. So she would just speak into the app, and it would write what she needs, and then all
It
she
will
needed to do is just format it a little bit.
exactly. So that can be a tool for a person with a disability from an employer to say, "Hey, I can use this, to help this person overcome this." The other big thing that I did with CPA, we never really yet had the transcribe software into some computer during this time. But the other thing that I remind the CPA was, guys, can we um can we move the the chairs close, like
Okay.
instead
Yeah.
of standing up and having the chair like far away. But because what if a person is a little bit like there was actually an individual work in the call center who had a little bit of a visual disability, who had a little bit of a visual sight
Mm-hmm.
that maybe she wouldn't be able to see that the
See
chair
very
was a
well.
little bit
Yeah.
farther away from the actual desk, and that person could have tripped and fall off, right?
Wow.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's make the awareness of, make sure that when you're standing up from your desk, you put your chair close, closer to where it's supposed to be. Make sure that you don't have any furniture in the middle of the hallway, and so make sure to move it away from the hallways and the person can go through. And situations like those are really important to kind of remind the employer, and that's what the employers can do here in Canada, and even in a place such as
Mm-hmm.
Nigeria or somewhere in Mexico, where they can be like, I actually had the opportunity in Mexico to speak to the human resources department at the General Electric, and they told me,
Oh,
okay, if you
that's
look at,
amazing, Carlos.
thank you, if you look
Yeah.
at the building, what did the building needs? And I go, well, the building needs a ramp here. The building needs accessible doors because there are glass doors. So when you push that, I can push it because I thankfully had pushed glass doors all my life when I used to live in Mexico from probably age 6 to age 17. I pushed glass doors. But what about a person with a wheelchair who is not able to maybe push that glass door
Mm-hmm.
properly? Can you put a button here? Can you make the bathroom a little bit wider for persons with wheelchairs to go in?
To go in, yeah.
So those are the type of recommendations that I gave to employers back at home, and some recommendations that I give to employers here in Canada to, at least in my organization, I have give pretty good input on some stuff that we can use as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Carlos. Carlos has shared with us how we can also live a fulfilled life with special needs and highlighting what we can do as individuals if we have a special need. His words are give yourself a chance. So, what is that thing that you want to do? Give it a chance, whether it's going back to school, volunteering, working, give it a chance. And I think if you give it a chance and it doesn't work out, just keep giving it a chance, keep trying other opportunities, reaching out to people. And that's what Carlos is saying here. And for employers, also making sure that you're doing what is necessary to support persons with special needs to come work in your organization. Don't say it's a hassle or it's too hard, it's too difficult, we have no funding for that. What is it within your budget that you have funding for? There's got to be something. Maybe it's just creating a space in a place that isn't used for anything right now. Maybe it's having wider tables, different chairs. There has to be something that you can do within your capacity, and it's having conversations, like Carlos said, with people who have special needs, perhaps, or educators who can tell you what it is that you can do within the capacity that you had. And Carlos, I think that's a great example, as you said, that you were meeting with HR. I think you said GE. HR
Yeah.
department, right? Yeah. And telling them this is what you need here and there. And I know Carlos might have pointed out some things that are very expensive, but nevertheless, you can start small. That's what I'm thinking. Start from
Mm-hmm.
what you can do within
Exactly.
your financial capacity and then work your way there. And I think sometimes for those of us over here, you might be able to apply for funding from the government to
Mm-hmm.
do bigger projects. The ramp that
Absolutely.
Carlos said, the elevator, or whatever else, right? But if you start small, let's say within making an office space more accessible, we can then build upon that. Because I know
Mm-hmm.
that you started a podcast with your co-host Leah. Tell us a
Wow.
little bit about My Life Without Limits podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. We started. Leah and I were mostly actually. Leah started to think about having a podcast like 5 years ago, and then we started to brainstorm together. Then about having a podcast, and then thankfully between last year, uh, around August or September, we started to kind of becoming having this podcast a fruition, having this podcast a, a a reality, right? So it's My Life Without Limits podcast is a podcast that wants to bring the stories are persons with disabilities or people with disabilities who are out there who want to have a platform that they can share their amazing stories, right? But
That's awesome.
I also keep asking, thank you. I also keep asking people that it doesn't have to be a person with a disability. I even have said to people from all over the world if they want to join us, or even somewhere in Canada who they want to use this platform to share their stories about what they went through in their own countries or here in Canada, or spread the word. For us, it's very important to share the stories from people. For Leah and myself, it's so important to share that stories of our community. And I think it's very that's why we started this podcast. And you can visit us as at my life at My Life Without Limits podcast and Instagram episode and all the platforms right now: Spotify, Apple Music,
Mm-hmm.
uh, Google Music, Podbean, everywhere. You can find us there and you can listen to.
Absolutely. I did visit you and Leah
Thank you.
have a beautiful chemistry. And I like what you guys are doing. Like you said, limits is not peculiar to people who have disabilities. It is everyone. We all have different kinds of limitations that we had to
Mhm.
go through. And then some of us overcame them. And let's come to your podcast and share that story. So I'd like to encourage our listeners to make sure you check out My Life Without Limits. Carlos is co-hosting with Leah, and I'm sure you will not be disappointed. And join the conversation. They're on Instagram. I'll make sure to tag all that information on this episode so people can go click on it and check you out. So,
Thank
Carlos,
you.
we are wrapping up the conversation today. I want you to give one advice to everyone who'll be listening today. What is one takeaway from today's conversation you would like them to know?
I would just like to say two words: just be humble and be as much tenacious as you can, but remain humble. I think that
Okay.
remaining humble and be tenacious is the best advice that I can give you. Don't give up. That's part of the things. Don't give up ever, and continue to fulfill your goals. So
Awesome. Thank you so much, Carlos. Tenacity is huge, 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 huge. I will take that as well. And I hope that everyone listening today will also take this home and implement it. So it's been a pleasure having you here. Thank you so much, Carlos.
thank you, EJ, for having me. It's been an absolute delight and pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you.